Kneel. Vivien Hale's riding whip cracked across the maid's shoulder. A sharp gasp rippled through the ballroom. Crystal glasses froze halfway to waiting lips. No one stepped forward. "Maybe pain will finally teach you where you belong," Vivien said, raising the whip again. Before it could fall, a man's hand caught the leather midair. His voice was calm, cold, absolute. "Touch her again, and you'll leave this house with nothing." Vivien smiled confidently. Then she turned around. The smile vanished. Ronan Blackwood had come home. For one suspended heartbeat, no one breathed. The decorative riding whip remained stretched between two people who represented opposite kinds of power. Vivien Hale wore flawless silk, priceless diamonds, and the confidence of a woman convinced the Blackwood estate already belonged to her. Ronan Blackwood stood in a simple charcoal suit that carried no visible symbols of authority. He did not need them. His presence alone transformed the ballroom. Guests who had been whispering moments earlier lowered their eyes. Politicians stopped mid-conversation. Investors quietly set down their glasses. Even the musicians let the final trembling note fade into silence. Without another word, Ronan loosened his grip. The whip slipped from Vivien's fingers and landed softly on the polished marble floor. He did not look at her. Instead, his attention settled on the woman standing before him. The maid's uniform was neat despite the chaos. One sleeve had torn where the leather struck. A faint red line crossed her shoulder, and another was already darkening near her collarbone. She had not cried. She had not begged. She simply stood there, her hands folded together, trying to remain composed while every guest stared at her. Ronan slowly removed his tailored suit jacket. The room watched in disbelief as he stepped forward and gently draped it over Ivy Lancaster's shoulders. The expensive fabric concealed the torn uniform without a single dramatic gesture. His voice remained calm. "You shouldn't be cold." Ivy looked up, startled. "Sir, I'm fine. I wasn't asking." The quiet reply carried no anger, yet it somehow felt heavier than a shout. For the first time that evening, Ivy lowered her gaze, not from humiliation, but from confusion. No employer had ever protected her before. Ronan finally turned toward the crowded ballroom. His expression remained unreadable. "Who," he asked evenly, "gave permission for this?" The question drifted through the hall like winter air. Nobody answered. Not immediately. Several executives glanced toward Vivien. Others suddenly found great interest in the crystal chandeliers overhead. A senator cleared his throat. Someone quietly stepped backward. No one wanted to become the first person to speak. Vivien recovered first. She offered a graceful smile, practiced over years of attending charity galas and magazine interviews. "Darling," she said lightly, "it's nothing serious." She gestured dismissively toward Ivy. The maid was careless. A little discipline was necessary. "Discipline?" Ronan repeated the word as though hearing it for the first time. Vivien nodded confidently. "She ruined my glove in front of our guests. I simply reminded the staff to be more careful." Several guests gave hesitant smiles, hoping the explanation would end the uncomfortable scene. It did not. Ronan's gaze swept slowly across every face in the ballroom. Not one escaped it. His silence lasted only seconds. It felt much longer. Those who had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions suddenly felt like nervous schoolchildren awaiting judgment. The estate's longtime butler, Malcolm Reeves, stood near the entrance with his hands clasped behind his back. He had served 3 generations of the Blackwood family. He had seen Ronan furious exactly twice. Neither occasion had involved raised voices that frightened Malcolm far more than rage ever could. Ronan finally spoke again. "I asked who gave permission." Again, no answer. Vivien's elegant smile became slightly strained. "This is my event. I organized every detail. I was responsible for maintaining order." She stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to sound intimate. "We don't need to embarrass ourselves in front of our guests." Ronan regarded her quietly. "Our guests?" The two words landed like stones. Vivien blinked. Before she could respond, Ronan bent down and picked up the antique riding whip from the floor. For an instant, several people feared he might lose his temper. Instead, he examined the aged leather with detached curiosity. "This belonged to my grandfather," he said. "It was displayed as part of the estate's history." His eyes lifted slowly. "It was never intended to become a weapon." He handed the whip to Malcolm. "Lock it away." The elderly butler accepted it immediately. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood." No one missed the title. Not Sir, not Chairman, not even Master. Simply Mr. Blackwood, the form Malcolm reserved for moments when the entire household needed reminding who truly owned the estate. Ronan looked once more at Ivy. "You'll have your injuries examined." She instinctively shook her head. "They're only scratches." "They still matter." His answer was quiet. "Certain." Then he faced the silent ballroom one final time. "The reception will continue." A brief pause followed. "But before this evening ends, the truth of what happened here will be known." No one doubted him. The charity gala had begun as Vivien Hale's grand performance. In a matter of minutes, it had become Ronan Blackwood's judgment. The ballroom gradually found its voice again. Conversations resumed in cautious whispers rather than confident laughter. Crystal glasses clinked softly. The string quartet, uncertain whether music was still appropriate, began another gentle melody. Yet no one truly returned to the celebration. Every pair of eyes followed Ronan Blackwood. He walked beside Ivy, not ahead of her, through the wide corridor leading toward the private sitting room, adjacent to the estate's medical office. She kept one hand holding his jacket closed across her shoulders. The expensive wool felt strangely comforting, almost too comforting. "I really don't need a doctor," she said quietly. "You were struck with a whip." "I've had worse." Ronan stopped walking. Those 3 words disturbed him more than the injury itself. "You say that as though it's normal." A faint smile touched Ivy's lips. "It's not normal. It's simply life." Before Ronan could answer, Malcolm appeared carrying a small first aid case. "The physician is on his way, Mr. Blackwood." "Good." Malcolm looked toward Ivy with grandfatherly concern. "My dear, sit down for a moment." She obeyed immediately. While Malcolm prepared antiseptic, a young catering assistant hurried into the room. She could not have been older than 19. Her hands trembled so violently that the silver serving spoon she still carried rattled against the tray. I'm so sorry." Tears rolled freely down her cheeks. "This happened because of me." Ronan turned. "What do you mean?" The young woman lowered her head. "I slipped. The soup almost spilled onto one of the children who came with the charity guests. I panicked. Ivy stepped in front of him. She caught the bowl before it burned him." The girl's shoulders shook. A few drops landed on Miss Hale's glove. Ivy told everyone she had bumped into the tray. She said it was her fault. I let her." Silence filled the room. Ronan slowly looked at Ivy. "You accepted the blame." She seemed surprised the answer required explanation. "The child wasn't hurt. The assistant would have lost her job. It seemed like the easiest solution." "The easiest solution?" A tiny laugh escaped Ivy. It wasn't the best evening I've ever had, but yes, I thought everyone else would be spared. The young assistant suddenly knelt. I'm sorry. I should have spoken. Ivy immediately reached forward and helped her stand. No. We don't kneel to apologize. We learn. We do better. And next time, she gently adjusted the girl's crooked apron. Carry the soup with both hands. The nervous assistant actually laughed through her tears. I will. I promise. Malcolm exchanged a knowing glance with Ronan. Neither man spoke. The physician finally arrived and began cleaning the marks across Ivy's shoulder. She barely reacted when the antiseptic stung. Instead, she glanced anxiously toward the open kitchen doors. What time is the dessert auction? Malcolm blinked. I beg your pardon? The desserts. If the soufflés stay in the ovens much longer, they'll dry out. The chocolate glaze should be poured after plating, not before. The citrus tarts need another 5 minutes to cool, or the fruit will slide. Everyone stared at her. The doctor paused halfway through wrapping the bandage. You were just whipped. I know. But the guests donated a lot of money tonight. It would be a shame if the pastry collapsed. Without waiting for permission, Ivy stood. I'll only be gone for a minute. Ronan watched, genuinely bewildered, as she hurried toward the kitchens. Curiosity overcame him. He followed at a distance. Inside, organized chaos had replaced elegance. Chefs rushed between ovens. Servers whispered nervously about what had happened in the ballroom. The moment Ivy entered, every employee looked relieved. Miss Ivy, the caramel is crystallizing. The auction trays aren't ready. She clapped her hands once, not loudly, just enough to focus everyone's attention. Deep breaths. Oven 3, lower the temperature. Don't throw away the caramel. Add warm cream slowly. Emily, garnish the cheesecake after slicing. Michael, stop panicking. The guests can't taste fear. Soft laughter spread through the kitchen. The tension dissolved almost instantly. Within minutes, everyone moved with renewed confidence. No shouting, no blame, only quiet direction. Ronan remained unnoticed in the doorway. He had expected to see a maid. Instead, he saw someone naturally leading an entire hospitality team. People listened because they trusted her, not because they feared her. One exhausted pastry chef sighed with relief. I don't know what we'd do without you, Ivy grinned. You'd survive. You'd just serve slightly overcooked soufflés. The entire kitchen laughed. For the first time that evening, so did Ronan. It was brief, almost imperceptible. But it was real. Standing unnoticed beyond the doorway, the billionaire who commanded boardrooms and secretly ruled the city's most powerful criminal empire found himself unable to understand one simple mystery. How could the woman everyone treated as the lowest person in the house be the one quietly holding the entire house together? The charity reception continued long into the evening. Guests admired the flawless service. The desserts arrived perfectly timed. Wine glasses never remained empty. Every detail reflected effortless elegance. Few realized that only an hour earlier, the entire hospitality team had been on the verge of collapse. Fewer still noticed that the woman responsible for restoring order had quietly returned to polishing silver trays as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Ronan noticed. Long after the final speeches ended, he remained in his private study overlooking the East Gardens. The financial reports on his desk remained unopened. Instead, his thoughts kept returning to a woman in a maid's uniform who had protected a frightened stranger, accepted punishment without complaint, and then worried more about soufflés than her own injuries. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Come in. Malcolm Reeves entered, carrying 2 cups of black tea. He placed one on the desk without speaking. They had worked together for many years. The old butler knew when silence invited questions. Ronan looked toward the window. "Who is Ivy Lancaster?" Malcolm smiled faintly. "I wondered how long it would take before you asked." Ronan remained silent. Malcolm settled into the chair opposite him. "Most people believe she became a housemaid because she lacked ambition. The truth is almost the opposite." He paused before continuing. "Miss Lancaster graduated at the top of her class in hospitality management. Highest honors. Her professors expected she'd be managing an international luxury hotel before she turned 30. Ronan's eyes narrowed slightly. "And yet she's cleaning guest rooms." Malcolm nodded. Life changed faster than talent could save her. He folded his weathered hands together. Her father owned a family logistics company. He was an honest man, but he trusted the wrong business partners. When the company collapsed, the debts were enormous. They lost everything. The house, the savings, even her mother's jewelry. Ronan listened without interruption. "She could have declared bankruptcy," Malcolm continued. "Many people advised her to walk away. Instead, she chose to repay every creditor, one payment at a time. Every job she accepted had one purpose: to pay what her family owed." Ronan frowned thoughtfully. Why housekeeping? With her education, she could have found office work. Malcolm gave a quiet chuckle. "She tried. For nearly a year, but every interview ended the same way. They wanted experience. They wanted recommendations. They wanted connections. Debt had taken those too. The estate offered temporary work, so she accepted it." Ronan leaned back slowly. "And she never told anyone. There was no reason. She believes dignity isn't something people give you. It's something you decide to keep." The room fell silent. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the tall windows. Malcolm smiled at the memory of something. "Would you like to know the strangest part?" Ronan nodded once. "On her third day here, one of the newer employees accidentally broke an antique vase. He was terrified. He thought he'd be dismissed. So Ivy spent her entire week's wages replacing it before anyone discovered what happened." Ronan looked up. "She paid for someone else's mistake?" Malcolm nodded. The young man tried to repay her. She refused. "What did she say?" The old butler smiled warmly. "If you're determined to repay me, then help someone else when it's your turn." Neither man spoke for several moments. Finally, Ronan asked quietly, "Has she ever complained?" Malcolm almost looked offended by the question. "Not once. Not about the work. Not about the debt. Certainly not about Miss Hale. Though heaven knows she has every reason." Ronan stood and walked toward the window. Beyond the gardens, he could see lights glowing from the staff quarters. One small kitchen window remained illuminated. Following Malcolm's gaze, he noticed Ivy inside. She was sitting at the table with several younger employees. One housekeeper looked exhausted. Another appeared close to tears. Ivy was making exaggerated impressions of the evening's chaos, carefully leaving out every cruel detail involving herself. Within seconds, the entire table burst into laughter. Even the shy dishwasher who rarely spoke was smiling. "She does that often," Malcolm said softly, "when someone has a difficult day. She somehow convinces them tomorrow will be better." Ronan watched through the rain-speckled glass. She had every excuse to become bitter, every reason to resent the world. Instead, she seemed determined to make life easier for everyone around her. Not because anyone rewarded her, not because anyone noticed, simply because that was the kind of woman she had chosen to become. For the first time in many years, Ronan Blackwood felt something unfamiliar. It was not attraction. Not yet. It was something quieter. Something far rarer. Respect. Deep. Unshakable. The kind earned not by status, but by character. Vivien Hale had built her reputation on reading people. She could recognize insecurity hidden beneath expensive suits. She could identify ambition behind polite smiles. She knew exactly how to make influential people believe they had reached every conclusion on their own. For years, that talent had served her well. It had earned investors, magazine covers, luxury brand partnerships, and, most importantly, an engagement ring bearing the Blackwood family crest. But over the following days, she noticed something she had never expected. Ronan had changed. Not dramatically. Not obviously. The change revealed itself in quiet moments. When he entered the estate, he no longer asked Malcolm only about financial reports or renovation schedules. Sometimes he asked, "How is the staff today?" Or, "Has Miss Lancaster recovered?" The questions were brief, almost casual, yet they were always about the same person. Vivien noticed every one of them. One afternoon, she watched from the library balcony as Ivy crossed the courtyard, carrying fresh flowers for the guest suites. Halfway across the stone path, an elderly gardener struggled to lift a heavy planter. Without hesitation, Ivy set down her basket and helped him. They laughed about something neither of them could hear. A few minutes later, she continued on her way, as though the interruption had cost her nothing. Vivien's fingers tightened around her teacup. Why did people always smile around that woman? She wore a maid's uniform. She possessed no wealth, no influence, no family name worth mentioning. Yet the servants trusted her. The gardeners greeted her. Even Malcolm, who remained distant from nearly everyone, treated her with unmistakable affection. Most troubling of all, Ronan watched her. Not with desire. Not yet. With attention. Vivien understood attention. Attention became admiration. Admiration became attachment. She refused to allow that journey to begin. The following evening, several prominent guests remained at the estate after a business dinner. Among them were investors, socialites, and the editor of a luxury lifestyle magazine. Vivien saw an opportunity. She approached the gathering with a sympathetic smile. I suppose every large household has one employee who enjoys becoming everyone's favorite. One guest tilted his head. What do you mean? Vivien sighed as though reluctant to continue. I shouldn't gossip, but kindness can sometimes be strategic. The guests exchanged curious glances. She lowered her voice. I've noticed Miss Lancaster has a remarkable habit. Whenever wealthy visitors arrive, she somehow becomes the center of attention. Another woman frowned. She doesn't seem that type. Vivien gave a soft laugh. Appearances can be very persuasive. I've seen women build entire lives by making powerful men feel protective. She never directly accused Ivy of anything. She didn't have to. Suggestions often traveled farther than accusations. Within an hour, whispers began drifting through the estate. I heard she enjoys sympathy. They say she's much smarter than she looks. Perhaps the accident wasn't entirely accidental. No wonder Mr. Blackwood keeps asking about her. Each retelling added another layer, another assumption, another distortion. By the next afternoon, the rumors had quietly reached nearly every guest still staying at the estate. Ivy noticed the difference immediately. Conversation stopped when she entered a room. Smiles disappeared. A few guests looked at her with open suspicion. One young server approached nervously. Miss Ivy, they're saying terrible things. I know. Doesn't it upset you? For a brief moment, Ivy looked toward the window, where rain clouds drifted slowly across the afternoon sky. Then she smiled. A room only survives if it finds a place to live. The young woman blinked. I don't understand. If I spend my time chasing every lie, I'll never have time to live honestly. She gently squeezed the server's hand. So let them talk. The truth doesn't become weaker simply because someone whispers louder. The words stayed with the young employee long after Ivy walked away. Unfortunately, they did not reach everyone. Later that evening, Ivy entered the grand dining room carrying fresh linen. A pair of guests fell silent the moment they saw her. One deliberately moved her designer handbag closer. Another checked whether his watch remained on his wrist. Neither gesture escaped Ivy's notice. Neither drew a reaction. She quietly replaced the table settings with perfect precision before excusing herself with the same warm smile she offered every guest. From the opposite end of the corridor, Ronan witnessed the entire exchange. He saw the guarded expressions. He saw Ivy's quiet dignity. He also noticed something else. She never defended herself, not because she lacked the courage, because she believed her character would speak longer than any argument ever could, and for reasons he could not yet explain. He believed she was right. 3 days after the charity reception, Blackwood Estate appeared to have returned to normal. Fresh flowers decorated the entrance hall. The staff moved through the corridors with practiced efficiency. Business meetings filled Ronan Blackwood's calendar. Yet beneath the polished routine, tension lingered. No one had forgotten what had happened in the ballroom, least of all Ronan. He never made decisions while angry. He gathered facts. He observed. Only then did he act. Late that afternoon, he entered the estate's security office. The room fell silent. 2 technicians immediately stood. Mr. Blackwood, I need the recordings from the charity reception. Every camera covering the ballroom. Yes, sir. Within minutes, multiple screens illuminated the darkened room. The footage began long before the incident. Ronan watched without interruption. Guests arriving, servers carrying silver trays, musicians preparing their instruments. Everything appeared ordinary. Then he saw Ivy. She moved quietly between tables, helping guests before they even realized they needed assistance. She straightened a chair for an elderly donor, returned a child's lost toy, directed a confused volunteer toward the correct entrance. No audience, no expectation of praise, just quiet competence. The recording continued. A young catering assistant emerged, carrying a large bowl of steaming soup. The floor beneath her shoes glistened faintly. She slipped. The bowl lurched toward a little boy standing beside his mother. Before anyone else reacted, Ivy stepped forward. She caught most of the bowl with her bare hands. The soup splashed harmlessly across the floor. Only a few drops touched the edge of Vivien's designer glove. The child wasn't burned. The assistant remained standing. Then came the moment that changed everything. Vivien looked at her glove, looked at Ivy, looked around the ballroom. Ronan watched her expression harden. No confusion. No panic. Only calculation. She deliberately walked toward the antique display, removed the decorative riding whip, turned back, and struck Ivy. Not once. Twice. The second blow landed after Ivy had already lowered her head in apology. The room remained silent. No one had threatened Vivien. No one had encouraged her. She had chosen cruelty, frame by frame. The truth became impossible to deny. The security office fell completely still. One technician swallowed hard. I didn't realize it looked like that. Ronan's voice remained calm. It looked exactly like that. He stood. "Prepare the footage. I want every guest still staying at the estate invited to the ballroom." An hour later, the same crystal chandeliers illuminated the same elegant room, but the atmosphere felt entirely different. The remaining guests gathered in uneasy silence. Vivien entered confidently, believing another charitable announcement was about to be made. She smiled at reporters, adjusted her diamond bracelet, then noticed the large projection screen at the front of the ballroom. Her smile faltered. Ronan stood beside it, hands folded behind his back, expression unreadable. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said evenly, "there has been considerable discussion regarding the events of the charity reception. I believe discussions should end where evidence begins." The lights dimmed, the recording played, no narration, no dramatic music, only truth. The ballroom watched Ivy shield the frightened assistant. They watched the child pulled safely away. They watched Vivien pick up the whip. They watched the first strike, then the second. No one spoke. By the time the recording ended, several guests could no longer meet one another's eyes. The silence felt heavier than applause ever could. Vivien stepped forward. "Ronan, this is absurd. It was discipline. She embarrassed us." Ronan looked at her for a long moment. "You've repeated that explanation several times. It remains untrue." She laughed nervously. "You're choosing a maid over your own fiancé." "I'm choosing the truth." The words landed with quiet certainty. Vivien's composure finally cracked. "You can't humiliate me like this. I built relationships for this family. I stood beside your name. I've sacrificed years." "You sought the power of my name," Ronan interrupted softly. "Never the responsibility that came with it." She stared at him in disbelief. Around the ballroom, no one came to her defense. Not one guest, not one investor, not even her closest social acquaintances. The evidence had spoken too clearly. Ronan slowly removed the engagement ring from his pocket. He had carried it there since returning to the estate, without ceremony. He placed it on the nearest table. His voice never rose. "A woman who enjoys humiliating the innocent will never become part of my family." The words echoed through the ballroom. No anger, no revenge, only finality. Vivien's face drained of color. For the first time in years, she understood what real loss felt like. Not the loss of wealth, not reputation, but the loss of the future she had already claimed as her own. Across the room, Ivy stood quietly beside the staff. She had not asked for justice. She had not demanded an apology. Yet justice had found her anyway. As the silence settled over Blackwood Estate, everyone present realized the same truth. Power could command obedience. Fear could command silence. But only character could command respect. 3 weeks passed. The headlines that had once celebrated Vivien Hale's engagement now reported its sudden end. Commentators speculated endlessly. Some blamed incompatible personalities. Others whispered about business disagreements. No one outside Blackwood Estate ever learned the full truth. Ronan never explained. Ivy never spoke. Life within the estate gradually settled into a peaceful rhythm. Without constant tension hanging over the staff, laughter slowly returned to the kitchens. Employees no longer flinched whenever footsteps echoed through the corridors. Even Malcolm admitted the house seemed brighter. One crisp Monday's morning, Ivy stood alone in the laundry office, carefully folding her neatly pressed uniforms. Beside them rested a single envelope. Her resignation. She read it one final time before slipping it into a plain folder. The words had taken hours to write, not because they were complicated, because every sentence carried gratitude. Blackwood Estate had given her honest work when few others would. Her debts were nearly paid. She believed it was time to move on. The estate deserved peace. She did not want her presence to become the reason people continued discussing the broken engagement. As she stepped into the main hallway, Malcolm approached. "You look nervous," she smiled. "I've faced worse things than handing in a letter." "You have." The old butler glanced at the folder. "But I suspect this one weighs more." Before Ivy could answer, another employee hurried towards them. "Miss Lancaster, Mr. Blackwood would like to see you." She blinked. "Now?" "He asked if you were available." A few minutes later, Ivy stood outside Ronan's private office. She knocked softly. "Come in." The room was spacious, but surprisingly simple. Bookshelves lined one wall. Large windows overlooked the gardens. There were no unnecessary displays of wealth, only quiet order. Ronan rose from his desk. His attention immediately settled on the folder in Ivy's hands. "I was told you wished to speak with me." She nodded. "I came to thank you. And to give you this." She placed the envelope on his desk. He read only the first line before looking back up. "You're resigning." "I believe it's the right time." "You've found another position?" She hesitated. "Not yet. I'll look after I leave." Ronan remained silent for several moments. Then he closed the envelope without reading the rest. "No." She looked confused. "I'm sorry? I won't accept it." A faint laugh escaped her. "I'm not asking for a raise. I wasn't offering one." He walked toward the window before continuing. 3 weeks ago, I asked our foundation's executive board to evaluate every department. Our hospitality division received the lowest internal leadership score." She listened quietly. "They assumed we needed a better manager." He turned toward her. "They were wrong. We needed the right one." He placed a leather folder on the desk between them. "I'd like you to read this." She opened it carefully. Halfway down the first page, her eyes widened. "Director of Hospitality, Blackwood Foundation." She looked up immediately. "There must be some mistake." "There isn't. I've never directed an international foundation." "No. But I've watched you lead people. You organize chaos. You solve problems before others notice them. You earn trust without demanding it." She slowly closed the folder. "I'm still just a maid." Ronan smiled for the first time since she entered. "No. That's simply the uniform you've been wearing." The words caught her completely off guard. He stepped closer. "I didn't notice you because you were wearing a maid's uniform. I noticed you because everyone else lost their dignity. Except you." Silence settled between them. For a moment, Ivy could not find an answer. No employer had ever described her that way. No one had looked beyond her job title. She lowered her eyes. "I don't know if I'm capable," Ronan answered without hesitation. "I do." She looked at him again. "Why?" "Because leadership isn't measured by how many people obey you. It's measured by how many people become stronger because you were there." He paused. "I've watched this estate for years. Employees worked because they feared disappointing someone. After meeting you, I realized they worked harder because they didn't want to disappoint you." The distinction was impossible to ignore. Ivy felt emotion tightening her throat. She had spent years believing her education belonged to another life, another version of herself that no longer existed. Now someone was asking her to use it again, not out of pity, out of confidence. She smiled through unexpected tears. "I'll need time." "You have it." I won't pressure you." As she turned to leave, Ronan spoke once more. "Miss Lancaster." She looked back. "No matter what you decide, never let anyone convince you that your worth was ever defined by an apron." Walking out of the office, Ivy held the appointment folder against her chest. For the first time since losing everything. The future no longer felt like something she had to survive. It felt like something she was finally allowed to build. Autumn settled quietly over Blackwood Estate. The gardens glowed with shades of amber and gold, while the Blackwood Foundation entered its busiest season. Charity galas, educational grants, medical fundraisers and community programs filled the calendar. 3 months earlier, Ivy Lancaster had reluctantly accepted Ronan's offer. She was no longer wearing a maid's uniform. Instead, she now walked the estate, carrying planning folders, meeting schedules and hospitality reports. To her surprise, very little about her had changed. She still greeted every employee by name. She still carried trays when the kitchen fell behind. She still thanked the cleaners before thanking the executives. The only difference was that now everyone listened when she spoke. Not because of her title, because they had already trusted her long before she received it. Ronan noticed that nothing about authority had changed Ivy. If anything, responsibility had simply revealed who she had always been. Whenever they prepared for foundation events, they worked side by side. He handled negotiations with donors and corporate partners. She transformed grand ideas into welcoming experiences that made every guest feel valued. Neither sought the spotlight. Their partnership became effortless. One afternoon, during preparations for a children's literacy fundraiser, a sudden power outage interrupted the entire venue. Staff members immediately panicked. Decorative lighting disappeared. Kitchen equipment stopped. Guests were expected within 2 hours. Several managers began talking over one another. Before confusion could spread further, Ivy stepped into the center of the room. "Everyone, look at me." Her voice remained calm. "Generators will take care of the kitchen. Candles can replace decorative lighting. The children came to raise money for books. They won't remember whether every chandelier was glowing. They'll remember whether they felt welcome." The room quieted. People returned to work with renewed confidence. Standing near the entrance, Ronan watched her with quiet admiration. Months ago, she had believed leadership belonged only to people with expensive offices. Now she inspired entire teams without realizing it. That evening, the fundraiser became one of the foundation's most successful events. As the final guests departed, Ivy slipped outside into the estate gardens. The cool evening air felt refreshing after hours of smiling and organizing. She sat beside the reflecting pool, finally allowing herself a moment of silence. A few minutes later, footsteps approached. She smiled without turning. "I thought you might still be working." Ronan sat beside her. "I was. I decided the paperwork could wait." For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence felt comfortable, not awkward, just peaceful. Finally, Ivy looked toward the moon, reflected across the water. "May I ask you something?" "Anything." She hesitated. It was a question she had carried for months. "Why did you trust me so quickly?" Ronan didn't answer immediately. He watched the ripples spreading across the surface of the pond. "When I first returned that night, I thought I was stopping someone from being treated unfairly." He smiled faintly. "I didn't realize I was meeting someone extraordinary." Ivy laughed softly. "I think you're exaggerating." "I don't." He turned toward her. The security footage showed everyone what happened. But it wasn't the whip that stayed in my mind. It was what happened before. She looked at him, puzzled. "You stepped in front of that child. You protected the catering assistant. You accepted blame without expecting anyone to defend you. He paused. The first person you protected wasn't yourself. It was someone weaker than you. The words settled gently between them. I've spent years surrounded by people who calculated every decision according to what they would gain. You were different. You acted before you had time to think about yourself. He smiled. That's impossible to fake. Ivy felt tears gathering unexpectedly. I never thought anyone noticed. I noticed. So did everyone whose life became easier because you were there. She lowered her eyes. I've made plenty of mistakes. We all have. But kindness was never one of them. Ronan reached for her hand. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Slowly enough that she could move away if she wished. She didn't. Their fingers intertwined naturally. Ivy, I don't admire you because you rescued one child. I admire you because compassion is simply who you are. He took a quiet breath. And that's the kind of person I want beside me forever. For a heartbeat, the world seemed perfectly still. Ivy searched his face. There was no pressure, no expectation, only quiet honesty. The same honesty she had come to admire in him. A smile, bright and unguarded, slowly warmed her face. I was hoping you'd say that. Ronan laughed softly. It was the easiest laugh he had known in years. Beneath the autumn sky, without grand speeches or extravagant promises, their love began exactly as their respect had, quietly, genuinely, and with complete trust. 1 year later, Blackwood Estate opened its gates for another annual charity reception. The grand ballroom sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers. Fresh white roses lined the marble staircase. A string quartet welcomed guests as business leaders, philanthropists, journalists, and community volunteers arrived from across the city. The elegance remained unchanged. The atmosphere didn't. Before greeting a single donor, Ivy Lancaster stood near the staff entrance. She welcomed every employee personally, the chefs, the gardeners, the housekeepers, the servers. She thanked each of them for coming. She asked whether anyone needed extra help before the evening began. When she reached the youngest housemaid on the team, the nervous girl admitted it was her first formal reception. I'm afraid I'll make a mistake. Ivy smiled warmly. Then you'll fit in perfectly. The young woman blinked. I made mistakes at my first reception, too. You did? Of course. The difference isn't whether we make mistakes. It's whether we learn without losing confidence. The housemaid laughed softly. The fear in her eyes faded. From across the entrance hall, Ronan watched the exchange with quiet pride. She had transformed the estate in ways no renovation ever could. The evening unfolded beautifully. Guests praised the flawless service. Charitable pledges exceeded every expectation. Near the end of the reception, as servers carried dessert into the ballroom, the young housemaid accidentally caught the edge of a tablecloth. A silver tray tilted. Porcelain plates shattered across the marble floor. The room fell silent. The young employee's face turned pale. I'm so sorry. I'll pay for everything. Without hesitation, Ivy knelt beside her. She carefully gathered the broken pieces before anyone could step on them. Then she looked up with the same reassuring smile that had comforted countless people before. Are you hurt? The girl shook her head, tears filling her eyes. No. Then the important part is already solved. Several nearby guests quietly smiled. Others immediately stepped forward to help clean the floor. No one blamed the young employee. No one raised a voice. Watching the scene unfold, a newspaper reporter approached Ronan. I've covered events at Blackwood Estate for years. He glanced toward Ivy as she comforted the embarrassed housemaid. This place feels completely different now. What changed this house? Ronan followed the reporter's gaze. His answer came without hesitation. The day kindness replaced fear. The reporter lowered his notebook. No further explanation seemed necessary. Around the ballroom, conversations resumed. Music filled the air once more. Employees smiled instead of trembling. Guests noticed warmth instead of intimidation. The estate had once been admired because of its wealth. Now it was remembered because of its humanity. Across the room, Ivy looked up and met Ronan's eyes. No words passed between them. None were needed. Their smiles carried everything: respect, trust, healing, love. As applause rose to celebrate another successful evening of generosity, it lingered far longer than anyone expected. Long after the final donation had been announced, long after the music had ended, the sound echoed through Blackwood Estate, not in honor of luxury, not in honor of power, but in honor of one simple truth. The strongest hearts are never the ones that inspire fear. They are the ones that teach others they never needed to be afraid in the first place.